When the last radio transmission crackled through the static at 0347 hours, nobody at headquarters expected to hear from Bravo Company again. 1,000 Marines had vanished into the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, presumed dead after their convoy was ambushed in what would later be called the bloodiest 72 hours of the entire war. The official reports would claim equipment failure. The news would speak of heroic sacrifice. But two sisters working different shifts at a military communications base knew something nobody else did. Those Marines were still alive, and they were screaming for help on a frequency that officially didn't exist. What Sarah Chen discovered at 3:47 a.m. on her overnight monitoring shift would force her to make an impossible choice: follow military protocol and let 1,000 men die, or risk everything to save them. Her decision and her sister's willingness to break every rule they'd sworn to uphold would expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military command and change how the world understood the true cost of war. This is the story of how two women with nothing but courage and a ham radio saved 1,000 lives that their own government had already written off as acceptable losses. The mountains of Kunar province had swallowed entire armies before. Soviet forces learned this lesson in the 1980s when the jagged peaks and hidden valleys became graveyards for their best units. American forces thought their technology would make the difference, but the Hindu Kush mountains didn't care about night vision goggles or satellite communications. They had their own rules, and those rules were written in blood. Sarah Chen had been monitoring military frequencies for 3 years when she first heard the impossible transmission. As a civilian contractor working the graveyard shift at Forward Operating Base Chapman, her job was supposed to be routine: scan the assigned frequencies, log any unusual activity, and file reports that nobody would probably read. The work paid well enough to support her younger sister Emma's college education, and it kept her close to the action without putting her directly in harm's way. But nothing about that October night felt routine. Sarah had always been good with electronics. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, she'd spent her teenage years building ham radios and helping her father repair communication equipment for the local fire department. When the military started outsourcing technical positions to civilian contractors, she jumped at the chance to use her skills somewhere that mattered. The recruiter had painted a picture of meaningful work supporting American troops overseas, and Sarah bought into it completely. Her sister Emma was different. 2 years younger and studying journalism at Berkeley, Emma had always questioned authority in ways that made Sarah uncomfortable. While Sarah saw rules as necessary structure, Emma saw them as obstacles to truth. Their phone calls had become tense affairs, with Emma constantly asking pointed questions about Sarah's work that Sarah couldn't or wouldn't answer. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that Emma's skeptical nature would soon become their greatest asset. The base at Chapman was a sprawling collection of prefabricated buildings and communication towers tucked into a valley that offered some protection from the constant wind. Sarah's shift ran from midnight to 8 a.m., and she'd grown accustomed to the isolation. Most nights, the frequencies were quiet except for routine check-ins and weather reports. The real action happened during daylight hours when patrol units were active and supply convoys moved through the dangerous mountain passes. That's why the transmission at 0347 hours caught her so off guard. At first, it sounded like equipment malfunction, a burst of static punctuated by what might have been human voices. Sarah almost dismissed it entirely, but something in the cadence made her pause. She'd heard enough military communications to recognize the rhythm of soldiers under stress, and this sounded like panic. She fine-tuned her equipment and waited. 15 minutes passed before she heard it again. Clearer this time. A voice, definitely American, speaking in short, urgent bursts. Any station. This is Bravo Company. We are alive. Repeat. Bravo Company survivors. Need immediate extraction. Sarah's blood went cold. Bravo Company had been declared lost with all hands 18 hours earlier. Their convoy had been hit by what intelligence reports described as a coordinated ambush involving improvised explosive devices and small arms fire. The official casualty count was 1,000 Marines, the largest single-day loss of American forces since Vietnam. She grabbed her logbook and started documenting everything. Time, frequency, signal strength, exact wording. But even as she wrote, she knew she was hearing something that wasn't supposed to exist. Dead men don't send radio transmissions. The voice came back stronger. This is Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, commanding Bravo Company survivors. We have approximately 800 effective personnel seeking immediate extraction. Current position. The signal dissolved into static. Sarah's hands were shaking as she reached for the secure phone to contact her supervisor, but something made her hesitate. If Bravo Company survivors were broadcasting, why wasn't anyone else hearing them? The military had sophisticated monitoring equipment scanning every frequency around the clock. How was she the only one picking up these transmissions? She spent the next hour trying to raise the signal again, but heard nothing. When her shift supervisor made his rounds at 0500 hours, Sarah showed him her logs. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was a career military man who'd seen action in Iraq before taking the desk job at Chapman. He listened to her report with the skeptical expression of someone who'd heard too many false alarms. "Chen, Bravo Company is gone," he said flatly. "I was in the command center when the reports came in. We had satellite coverage of the entire ambush. Nobody walked away from that. But, sir, I heard them." Lieutenant Colonel Webb himself requesting extraction. Rodriguez rubbed his temples. "Look, you've been pulling double shifts all week. Mountain atmospherics can play tricks with radio signals. Sometimes you pick up old transmissions bouncing off the ionosphere, stuff from months ago. It happens." Sarah wanted to argue, but Rodriguez was already moving on to other duties. She spent the rest of her shift replaying the recorded segments she'd managed to capture, but the quality was poor, and she began to doubt herself. Maybe Rodriguez was right. Maybe exhaustion was making her hear things that weren't there. But when she called Emma that evening, her sister's reaction was immediate and intense. "You need to document everything," Emma said without hesitation. "If there's even a chance those men are alive, you have a responsibility to act." "Emma, you don't understand military protocol." "I can't just forget protocol," Emma interrupted. "You heard American soldiers asking for help. That's not about protocol. It's about human decency." Sarah explained about the official casualty reports and Rodriguez's explanation about atmospheric interference, but Emma wasn't buying it. "Sarah, I'm studying journalism, remember? I know how to research things. Give me the details. Unit designation, commander's name, everything you heard. Let me look into this Bravo Company." Against her better judgment, Sarah shared what she'd documented. Emma promised to call back within 24 hours. The next night, Sarah approached her shift with new anxiety. Part of her hoped the frequency would stay quiet, that she could go back to routine monitoring and forget about the whole incident. But a larger part needed to know if those voices were real. At 0312 hours, the signal returned. This time, it was different. Multiple voices, clearer transmission, and a story that made Sarah's worst fears seem trivial compared to the reality. "Any station? This is Bravo Company," came the familiar voice of Lieutenant Colonel Webb. "We have been holding position Sierra 7 for 36 hours. Casualties are mounting. We intercepted enemy communications indicating our position has been deliberately disclosed to hostile forces." Sarah grabbed her headset and started recording everything. "We were not ambushed," Webb's voice continued. "We were led into a trap. Repeat, Bravo Company was intentionally directed into a kill zone by our own command structure. We have evidence of coordinated betrayal at the highest levels." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If Webb was telling the truth, then Bravo Company hadn't been the victims of a tactical error or enemy intelligence. They'd been deliberately sacrificed by their own command. But the transmission wasn't finished. "We know this frequency is being monitored," Webb said, and Sarah felt like he was speaking directly to her. "To whoever is receiving this transmission, we need you to understand that we are not casualties of war. We are casualties of politics. It's someone wanted Bravo Company eliminated, and they used enemy forces to do it." The signal started breaking up, but Sarah caught fragments, evidence in Lieutenant Morrison's pack. Orders came directly from, "They won't send extraction because," then nothing but static. Sarah sat in the dark communication center, her mind racing. If this was real, she was listening to the last words of men who'd been abandoned by their own government. But if it wasn't real, she was about to destroy her career and possibly her life chasing shadows. Her phone rang. Emma's voice was tight with excitement and anger. Sarah, I found something. Bravo Company exists, but officially they're listed as a training unit stationed in North Carolina. They were never supposed to be in Afghanistan. That's impossible. I heard their casualty reports on the news. That's just it. I can't find any news reports. I've searched every major network, every newspaper, every military publication. There's no record of any major casualties in Afghanistan this week. No mentions of Bravo Company, no reports of 1,000 Marines killed in action. Sarah felt the world shifting around her. Emma, I was in the command center. I saw the reports myself. Then somebody is going to a lot of trouble to make sure the wrong people don't hear about it. The sisters talked for another hour, trying to make sense of what they were discovering. Emma had used her journalism contacts to dig deeper into military records, and what she found painted a disturbing picture. Bravo Company officially existed only on paper, a ghost unit created for purposes that weren't clear from any public records. Sarah, I think you've stumbled onto something huge, Emma said finally. But you need to be careful. If someone is powerful enough to make 1,000 Marines disappear from the official record, they're powerful enough to make you disappear too. Over the next 2 days, Sarah continued intercepting transmissions from Bravo Company. The reports grew more desperate as their situation deteriorated. Webb's updates painted a picture of men trapped in hostile territory, running low on ammunition and medical supplies, while enemy forces closed in from all directions. But the most chilling revelation came during a transmission on the third night. We have confirmation that extraction was deliberately denied, Webb reported. Lieutenant Morrison recovered communications equipment from the ambush site. We now have recorded proof that our convoy route was provided to enemy forces by someone with access to classified operational plans. Webb's voice carried a mixture of rage and resignation that Sarah had never heard before. To whoever is monitoring this frequency, we need you to know that Bravo Company was expendable from the beginning. Someone needed a unit to disappear without questions, and we were selected for termination. The ambush was just the cover story. Sarah realized she was crying. These weren't just voices on a radio anymore. They were real men with families and futures, abandoned by the very system they'd sworn to serve. But Webb wasn't finished. We know our transmissions are being received because enemy forces are adjusting their positions based on information that could only come from our radio traffic. Someone is feeding our communications directly to hostile forces in real time. The implication was staggering. Not only had Bravo Company been deliberately sacrificed, but someone was using their desperate calls for help to help enemy forces finish the job. Sarah looked around the communications center with new eyes. Her equipment was connected to the main base communications system. Everything she heard was being automatically recorded and transmitted to higher command levels. If Webb was right, then her monitoring wasn't helping Bravo Company. It was helping their enemies track them down. She made a decision that would change everything. Sarah disabled the automatic recording system and switched her equipment to operate independently from the base network. If she was going to help Bravo Company, she needed to make sure their communications stayed private. But she also knew she couldn't do this alone. She called Emma at 0400 hours, waking her sister from sleep. Emma, I need your help. But first, I need you to understand that what I'm about to ask you could get us both killed. Emma's response was immediate. What do you need me to do? Sarah explained about the monitoring system and her suspicions that Bravo Company's transmissions were being used against them. She needed someone she could trust completely, someone who could help coordinate a rescue effort without going through official channels. You want me to come to Afghanistan? Emma asked. I want you to help me save 1,000 Marines that everyone else has written off as acceptable losses. There was a long pause before Emma spoke again. Sarah, I graduate in 3 weeks. I was planning to look for journalism jobs after finals. Emma, these men are going to die if we don't help them. And if we're right about what's really happening, this story is bigger than anything you'll ever work on as a journalist. Another pause. How do I get there? Sarah felt relief flood through her. She wasn't going to face this alone. I can arrange contractor credentials through the base personnel office. It'll take 72 hours to process, but I can get you here as a technical specialist. Sarah, I don't know anything about military communications. You don't need to. You just need to help me figure out how to get these men home alive. Over the next week, as Emma prepared to leave Berkeley and join Sarah at Forward Operating Base Chapman, the transmissions from Bravo Company grew more desperate. Webb reported that enemy forces had them surrounded on 3 sides, and their ammunition was running critically low. Medical supplies were exhausted, and they had wounded men who wouldn't survive much longer without proper care. But the most important revelation came during Webb's final transmission before Emma's arrival. "We have identified the source of the intelligence leak," Webb reported. "The orders for our termination came from Colonel James Patterson, commanding officer of Joint Special Operations Command. We have recorded evidence that Patterson received direct authorization from the Pentagon to eliminate Bravo Company using enemy forces as proxies." Sarah's heart stopped. Colonel Patterson was the base commander at Chapman. He was Rodriguez's boss, and ultimately, her boss too. Webb's voice continued. "Patterson has been using Forward Operating Base Chapman as a communication hub to coordinate with enemy forces. Anyone monitoring frequencies from Chapman should assume their transmissions are being intercepted and used against American forces in the field." Sarah realized that her own equipment might be compromised. If Patterson was collaborating with enemy forces, then he had access to all the monitoring data from her station. He would know that she'd been intercepting Bravo Company's transmissions. She was no longer just trying to save 1,000 Marines. She was racing to stay ahead of people who had already proven they were willing to sacrifice American lives to protect their secrets. Emma's plane landed at Bagram Airfield on a gray Thursday morning. Sarah met her at the transport helicopter that would take them to Chapman, and she barely recognized her sister. Emma had traded her Berkeley student wardrobe for military contractor clothing, and her usually confident demeanor was replaced by obvious anxiety. But when Emma heard her first transmission from Bravo Company that night, her journalist instincts kicked in. "We need to document everything," Emma said, setting up her laptop next to Sarah's monitoring equipment. "If we're going to expose this conspiracy, we need evidence that can't be disputed." "Emma, we're not trying to expose anything. We're trying to save those men." "Sarah, think about what you're saying. If we save them without exposing why they needed saving, the same people who tried to kill them once will just try again." Emma was right, but Sarah wasn't sure she was ready for the implications. Exposing a conspiracy at the highest levels of military command would destroy her career and possibly her freedom. But letting Bravo Company die to protect her own interests was unthinkable. The decision was made for them when Lieutenant Colonel Webb's next transmission revealed that Bravo Company had less than 18 hours before enemy forces would overrun their position completely. Emma's first night at Forward Operating Base Chapman changed everything. While Sarah had been focused on the immediate crisis of saving Bravo Company, Emma approached the situation with the methodical mindset of an investigative journalist. She set up her laptop beside Sarah's monitoring equipment and began building what she called the file, a comprehensive documentation of every transmission, every inconsistency in official reports, and every piece of evidence that pointed to a larger conspiracy. "We need to assume that everyone here is potentially compromised," Emma told Sarah as they prepared for the overnight shift. "If Colonel Patterson is really coordinating with enemy forces, then he has allies throughout the command structure." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the implications. "Emma, these are people I work with every day. Rodriguez has been looking out for me since I got here. I can't just assume everyone is part of some conspiracy." "You don't have to assume anything," Emma replied, connecting a small digital recorder to Sarah's equipment. "We just need to be careful who we trust until we know more." At 0200 hours, Lieutenant Colonel Webb's voice crackled through the static with an urgency that made both sisters freeze. "This is Webb, Bravo Company. Enemy forces have breached our perimeter on the east side. We have wounded who cannot be moved. Request immediate air support or we will be overrun within 6 hours." Emma grabbed her notebook and started transcribing while Sarah worked to improve the signal clarity. But what came through next made them both realize they were dealing with something far more complex than a simple abandonment of troops. "We have intercepted enemy communications confirming that American air assets are being deliberately withheld from our location," Webb continued. "Someone with command authority is ensuring that no rescue attempt reaches us." Sarah felt sick. It was one thing to suspect that Bravo Company had been set up, but hearing confirmation that their own Air Force was being prevented from helping was devastating. "Emma," Sarah whispered, If they're blocking air support, then even if we figure out where Bravo Company is located, we can't get help to them through normal channels. Emma was already thinking ahead. Then we need to find abnormal channels. Over the next 3 hours, Emma used her laptop to access military databases that Sarah didn't even know existed. Emma's journalism professors had taught her how to navigate public records and military archives, skills that proved invaluable in the current situation. "Sarah, look at this," Emma said, pointing to her screen. "I found the original deployment orders for Bravo Company. They were supposed to be conducting a training exercise in North Carolina, but someone modified their orders at the last minute to send them to Afghanistan." Sarah leaned over to read the documents Emma had found. The trail of authorization led through several levels of command, but the final signature belonged to someone neither sister recognized: General Marcus Hoffman, Deputy Director of Military Intelligence.
"Who is General Hoffman?" Sarah asked.
"That's what's interesting," Emma replied. "According to these records, General Hoffman doesn't officially exist. There's no personnel file for him, no service record, no photograph. But his signature appears on dozens of classified operational orders. The implications were staggering. Not only was Bravo Company fighting for their lives against enemy forces, they were also fighting against a shadow organization within their own military that didn't exist on paper. Emma's research revealed even more disturbing information. Over the past 2 years, several American military units had suffered unexplained casualties in situations remarkably similar to Bravo Company's predicament. In each case, the units had been operating under modified orders that couldn't be traced through normal command channels. "Sarah, I think we're looking at something much bigger than one abandoned unit," Emma said. "Someone is systematically eliminating American forces, and they're using enemy combatants to do it." Before Sarah could respond, her monitoring equipment picked up a new transmission, but this time it wasn't coming from Bravo Company. The voice was American, but the conversation was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard on military frequencies. "Raven 6 to control. Bravo Company position is confirmed. Enemy forces are in position for final assault." Sarah and Emma exchanged shocked looks. Someone was coordinating the attack on Bravo Company using American military communication protocols. "Control to Raven 6, came the response. "Maintain surveillance until target is eliminated. No survivors." Emma was recording everything, but Sarah felt like she was listening to her own death warrant. If American personnel were actively coordinating the elimination of Bravo Company, then anyone trying to help them would become a target as well. "Emma, we need to get out of here," Sarah said, but her sister was already packing her laptop. "Not yet," Emma replied. "We need to get this information to someone who can act on it." "Who?" "If this conspiracy goes as high as we think it does, we don't know who we can trust." Emma stopped packing and looked directly at Sarah. "We need to contact Bravo Company directly and coordinate our own rescue operation." "Emma, we're civilian contractors with no military training and no resources. How exactly do you propose we rescue 1,000 Marines from hostile territory?" "We don't rescue them," Emma said. "We help them rescue themselves." Emma explained her plan while they packed up their equipment. Instead of trying to coordinate through official channels that were clearly compromised, they would establish direct communication with Lieutenant Colonel Webb and help him plan an escape route that bypassed the enemy forces surrounding his position. "Emma, even if we could help them get away from the immediate threat, where would they go? They're in the middle of Afghanistan with no support. That's where it gets interesting," Emma said, pulling up a map on her laptop. "I've been studying the terrain around their last known position. There's an abandoned Soviet military installation, about 40 kilometers north of where they're trapped. If they could reach it, they'd have shelter and defensive positions." Sarah studied the map. "How do you know about a Soviet installation?" "I found references to it in declassified CIA reports from the 1980s. The Soviets built dozens of forward operating bases throughout these mountains during their occupation. Most were abandoned when they withdrew, but the structures are still intact. It was a desperate plan, but Sarah realized it might be their only option. If Bravo Company could break through the enemy encirclement and reach the Soviet installation, they might survive long enough for Emma to expose the conspiracy and force an official rescue. But first, they needed to establish secure communication with Lieutenant Colonel Webb without alerting Colonel Patterson or his allies to what they were planning. Emma had a solution for that problem, too. "I brought something from Berkeley," she said, pulling a small device from her backpack. "It's a frequency hopper that can establish encrypted communication on bands that aren't normally monitored by military intelligence." Sarah recognized the device as sophisticated ham radio equipment, far more advanced than anything she'd used growing up. "Emma, where did you get this?" "My journalism professor helped me borrow it from the engineering department. He said if we were really going to expose military corruption, we'd need communication methods they couldn't intercept." Sarah realized that Emma had been planning this operation from the moment she agreed to come to Afghanistan. Her sister hadn't just come to help monitor radio transmissions. She'd come prepared to wage a private war against whoever was trying to eliminate Bravo Company. They spent the rest of the shift establishing encrypted communication with Lieutenant Colonel Webb. When they finally made contact, his relief was obvious even through the static. "Unknown station, this is Webb. Who am I speaking with?" Emma took the microphone. "Colonel Webb, my name is Emma Chen. My sister and I have been monitoring your transmissions from Forward Operating Base Chapman. We believe we can help you escape your current position." There was a long pause before Webb responded. "Miss Chen, I appreciate your intentions, but we are facing a coordinated enemy assault with limited ammunition and wounded personnel who cannot be moved quickly. Colonel, we've been documenting evidence that your situation is the result of deliberate betrayal by American command personnel. We believe we can help you reach safety while gathering proof of what's been done to you." Another pause, longer this time. "Miss Chen, are you saying that American personnel are coordinating with enemy forces against my unit?" "That's exactly what we're saying, Colonel, and we have recordings to prove it." Emma played back the transmission they'd intercepted earlier, the American voices coordinating the final assault on Bravo Company's position. The silence on the frequency stretched for nearly a minute before Webb spoke again. "Miss Chen, what kind of help are you offering?" Emma explained about the Soviet installation and the escape route she'd mapped out. Webb listened without interruption, asking occasional questions about terrain features and defensive positions. "Miss Chen, your plan has merit, but you're asking my men to abandon defensive positions and move through hostile territory with minimal ammunition. If we're discovered during the movement, we'll be eliminated in open terrain with no cover. Colonel, if you stay where you are, you'll be eliminated anyway. At least this way, you have a chance." Webb's response revealed just how desperate their situation had become. "Miss Chen, we have been holding this position for 4 days with no resupply. We have wounded men who will die without medical attention, and we're down to approximately 30 rounds per man. The enemy has been probing our perimeter every few hours, testing our response capabilities." Sarah took the microphone from Emma. "Colonel Webb, this is Sarah Chen, Emma's sister. I work in the communication center at Chapman. We've been monitoring enemy traffic as well as your transmissions. The enemy forces surrounding you are expecting you to stay in your current position. They're not prepared for a coordinated breakout attempt." "What do you mean by coordinated breakout?" Sarah looked at Emma, who nodded encouragingly. "Colonel, we can monitor enemy communications and provide you with real-time intelligence about their positions and movements. If you move during their next position change, you might be able to slip through their surveillance." Webb was quiet for a long time before responding. "Miss Chen, you're asking me to trust the lives of my remaining men to 2 civilian contractors I've never met, based on a plan that involves reaching a Soviet installation that might not even be defensible." "Colonel," Emma said, taking the microphone back, "someone with access to the highest levels of American command has already tried to kill you once. Are you willing to trust them with your men's lives?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. "What do you need from us?" Webb finally asked. Emma and Sarah spent the next 2 hours walking Webb through the escape plan. They would monitor enemy communications and provide advance warning of patrol movements. Webb would divide his men into 3 groups, each taking a different route toward the Soviet installation. If one group was discovered, the others might still make it through. "Colonel, we need you to understand something," Emma said as they finalized the plan. "Once you start moving, we won't be able to help you if you're discovered. The frequency hopper has limited range, and we can't risk exposing our position by boosting the signal." "Understood. When do you recommend we move?" Emma looked at Sarah, who was monitoring enemy communications on her regular equipment. Enemy forces rotate positions every 6 hours, Sarah reported. The next rotation is scheduled for 0400 hours. That gives you a 2-hour window when their coverage will be weakest. We'll be ready, Webb said. But as Sarah and Emma prepared to guide Bravo Company through their escape attempt, they realized they had their own problems to worry about. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had arrived early for his shift and was asking questions about why Sarah's equipment was operating independently from the main communication system. "Chen, what's the status on your monitoring station?" Rodriguez asked, reviewing Sarah's logs from the previous shift. "Everything's operational, Sergeant. I've been tracking routine traffic all night." Rodriguez looked suspicious. "Your logs show almost no activity for the past 6 hours. That's unusual for this sector." Sarah felt Emma tense beside her, but her sister continued working at her laptop as if she belonged there. "Sergeant, atmospheric conditions have been poor tonight," Sarah said. "Most transmissions have been too weak to log." Rodriguez walked over to Sarah's monitoring position and started examining her equipment. Sarah realized he was going to discover the modifications she'd made to operate independently from the base system. "Chen, why is your primary antenna disconnected from the main trunk?" Before Sarah could answer, Emma spoke up from her position at the laptop. "Sergeant, I'm Emma Chen, Sarah's sister. I'm here on a technical assessment contract to evaluate communication efficiency at remote installations." Rodriguez turned to look at Emma for the first time. "I wasn't informed about any technical assessment. The authorization came through Colonel Patterson's office yesterday," Emma said smoothly. Sarah's station was selected for independent monitoring to establish baseline performance metrics. Rodriguez looked confused, but Emma's professional demeanor and obvious technical competence seemed to satisfy his concerns. "Chen, make sure all modifications are documented in your shift report," Rodriguez said to Sarah, "and make sure your sister's assessment doesn't interfere with operational monitoring." As Rodriguez moved on to other duties, Emma gave Sarah a look that said they'd just bought themselves some time, but not much. At 0:35 hours, Sarah received confirmation that enemy forces were beginning their position rotation. She immediately contacted Lieutenant Colonel Webb on the encrypted frequency. "Raven Leader, this is Control," Sarah said, using the code names they'd established. "Package delivery is a go. Repeat, package delivery is a go." Webb's response was immediate. "Control, Raven Leader copies. Beginning package delivery in 3 minutes." Sarah and Emma watched their monitoring equipment as Bravo Company began their breakout attempt. On the enemy frequencies, Sarah could hear confusion as patrol units reported losing contact with the American position. "Enemy Patrol Alpha is reporting no movement at target location," Sarah transmitted to Webb. "Raven Leader copies. Group 2 is moving to secondary route." For the next 4 hours, Sarah and Emma provided real-time intelligence as Bravo Company's 3 groups navigated through enemy surveillance. 2 groups made it through without detection, but the 3rd group encountered an enemy patrol that hadn't followed the expected rotation schedule. "Control, this is Raven 3. Came Webb's urgent transmission. Group 3 is in contact with enemy forces. We need immediate diversion." Emma grabbed the microphone. "Raven 3, recommend you continue toward objective. We'll create diversion." Sarah stared at her sister. "Emma, what are you talking about? How are we going to create a diversion?" Emma was already typing commands into her laptop. "Sarah, your monitoring station is connected to the base communication system, right?" "Yes, but I disabled the connection. Can you re-enable it temporarily?" Sarah realized what Emma was planning. "You want to broadcast false information on the main frequency to confuse enemy forces. If we make them think there's American military activity in a different sector, they might redeploy away from Bravo Company's route." It was a desperate gamble that would definitely expose them to Colonel Patterson and his allies, but Sarah could hear gunfire in the background of Webb's transmissions, which meant Bravo Company's 3rd group was fighting for their lives. Sarah reconnected her equipment to the main base communication system and prepared to broadcast false intelligence that would make enemy forces believe American helicopters were approaching from the south. "Emma, once we do this, there's no going back. Patterson will know we've been helping Bravo Company. Sarah, those Marines are dying right now." We can worry about Patterson later. Sarah began broadcasting fabricated helicopter communications on frequencies she knew enemy forces were monitoring. Within minutes, her regular monitoring equipment picked up enemy transmissions indicating that several patrol units were being redirected to investigate the reported American aircraft. "Control, this is Raven 3, Webb's voice came through much clearer now. "Enemy contact has broken off. We are proceeding to objective." But Sarah's relief was short-lived. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was running toward their monitoring station with an expression of alarm and suspicion. "Chen!" Rodriguez shouted. "What the hell are you broadcasting?" Staff Sergeant Rodriguez reached Sarah's monitoring station just as Lieutenant Colonel Webb transmitted confirmation that all 3 groups from Bravo Company had successfully reached the abandoned Soviet installation. But Sarah barely heard Webb's report because Rodriguez was demanding answers she couldn't give without exposing everything. "Chen, I've got reports from 3 different intelligence units asking about unauthorized helicopter communications originating from this station," Rodriguez said, his voice tight with anger and confusion. "Start talking." Sarah looked at Emma, who was calmly packing her laptop as if nothing unusual had happened. Emma's composure gave Sarah the confidence to stick to their cover story. "Sergeant, I was running communication tests as part of my sister's technical assessment," Sarah said. "We needed to evaluate how the equipment performed under simulated operational conditions." Rodriguez stared at both sisters with obvious suspicion. "Chen, those weren't simulations. Those were active military communications that caused 3 enemy patrol units to redeploy from their assigned positions." Emma stood up and faced Rodriguez directly. "Sergeant, the technical assessment specifically required testing the equipment's ability to generate realistic military communications. If enemy forces responded to our test signals, that demonstrates the effectiveness of our communication systems." Rodriguez looked like he wanted to arrest both sisters on the spot, but he was clearly uncertain about his authority over civilian contractors. Before he could respond, the base alarm system began broadcasting an urgent message. "All personnel report to designated emergency positions. This is not a drill. Repeat, all personnel report to emergency positions immediately." Rodriguez grabbed his radio and called the command center for information. What he heard made his face go pale. "Chen, Colonel Patterson wants to see both of you in his office immediately," Rodriguez said. "And Chen, bring all of your monitoring logs and recordings from the past week." Sarah felt her stomach drop. If Patterson was calling them to his office, then he knew exactly what they'd been doing, but Emma seemed almost eager to meet with the base commander. "Sarah, this is our chance to get the evidence we need," Emma whispered as they gathered their equipment. "If Patterson is really coordinating with enemy forces, he'll make mistakes when he's confronted with what we know. Emma, he's not going to confess to treason just because we ask him nicely. He's more likely to have us arrested or worse." "That's why I'm recording everything," Emma said, showing Sarah a small digital recorder she'd hidden in her jacket. "Whatever happens in that meeting will be documented. Colonel Patterson's office was in the most secure section of Forward Operating Base Chapman, behind multiple security checkpoints and armed guards." As Sarah and Emma were escorted through the corridors, Sarah noticed that several of the guards were people she didn't recognize, despite working at the base for 3 years. Colonel Patterson was a tall, imposing man with gray hair and cold eyes that seemed to evaluate everything in terms of potential threats. When Sarah and Emma entered his office, he was studying a collection of documents spread across his desk. "Miss Chen," Patterson said to Sarah without looking up, "please have a seat. And you must be Emma Chen, the journalism student from Berkeley." Emma's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed her sister's hand move slightly toward the hidden recorder. "Colonel Patterson," Emma said, "I understand you have questions about the technical assessment I've been conducting." Patterson finally looked up from his documents and smiled, but there was nothing friendly about the expression. "Miss Chen, I'm not interested in your cover story. I know exactly why you're here, and I know exactly what you and your sister have been doing for the past week." The colonel stood up and walked around his desk to face both sisters directly. "You've been intercepting and recording classified military communications. You've been interfering with ongoing military operations. And most seriously, you've been providing aid and comfort to enemy forces by disrupting American intelligence operations." Sarah felt the accusation like a physical blow. "Colonel, we haven't provided aid to enemy forces. We've been trying to help American Marines who were abandoned by their own command." Patterson's smile widened. "Miss Chen, Bravo Company was eliminated 6 days ago in a coordinated enemy attack. What you've been hearing on your frequencies are enemy forces using captured American communication equipment to gather intelligence about our operations." Emma leaned forward in her chair. "Colonel, that's an interesting theory, but we have recordings of American personnel coordinating with enemy forces to eliminate Bravo Company. Would you like to hear them?" For the first time, Patterson's confident demeanor flickered slightly. "Miss Chen, I don't know what you think you've recorded, but I can assure you that no American personnel are collaborating with enemy forces." Emma pulled out her laptop and opened the audio files she'd been collecting all week. "Colonel, this is a recording from 3 days ago. Would you like me to play it for you?" Before Patterson could respond, Emma activated the playback. The office filled with the sound of American voices coordinating enemy attacks against Bravo Company. "Raven 6 to control. Bravo Company position is confirmed. Enemy forces are in position for final assault." Patterson's expression went completely cold. "Miss Chen, where did you obtain those recordings?" "From your communication system, Colonel. These transmissions were broadcast on frequencies monitored by this base." Patterson walked back to his desk and picked up a secure telephone. "Security, this is Colonel Patterson. I need an immediate escort for 2 civilians to detention facility Bravo. Charges are espionage and treason." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest, but Emma remained calm. "Colonel, before you have us arrested, there's something you should know," Emma said. "Those recordings, along with all of our documentation of the Bravo Company situation, have already been transmitted to several news organizations and congressional oversight committees." Patterson froze with the telephone still in his hand. "Miss Chen, you're lying." Emma pulled out her satellite phone, which she'd been using to upload files throughout their investigation. "Colonel, I'm a journalism student. The first thing they teach us is to protect our sources and our evidence. Everything we've discovered about the conspiracy to eliminate Bravo Company is already in the hands of people who can't be silenced by military detention." Patterson slowly hung up the secure telephone, but his eyes never left Emma's face. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "We want you to authorize immediate extraction of the Bravo Company survivors," Emma said. "And we want a full investigation of the conspiracy that tried to have them killed. Miss Chen, even if I wanted to authorize extraction, I don't have the authority to deploy air assets into hostile territory." Emma smiled for the first time since entering Patterson's office. "Colonel, that's interesting because according to the documents we've obtained, you have been deploying air assets into that exact same territory for the past 6 months. The only difference is that you've been using them to support enemy operations instead of American ones." Patterson sat down heavily in his chair. Sarah realized that Emma had been building this confrontation methodically, gathering evidence that would leave Patterson with no viable options except cooperation. "What kind of extraction are you proposing?" Patterson asked. Emma opened a new file on her laptop. "Bravo Company survivors are currently located at coordinates that I'll provide once you authorize the mission. They need immediate medical evacuation for their wounded and transport to a secure location where they can provide testimony about what happened to them. Miss Chen, if I authorize this extraction, it will expose operational details that could compromise other missions." "Colonel, the operational details are already compromised. The question is whether you want to be remembered as someone who helped save American Marines or someone who tried to have them killed." Patterson stared at Emma for a long moment, then picked up his secure telephone again. "Operations, this is Colonel Patterson. I need immediate authorization for emergency extraction mission at coordinates to be provided. Priority Alpha classification." While Patterson coordinated the extraction, Sarah tried to process everything that had happened. In less than a week, she and Emma had discovered a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military command, documented evidence of treason by American officers, and coordinated the rescue of 1,000 Marines who had been abandoned by their own government. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. "Colonel," Emma said while they waited for confirmation of the extraction authorization, "there's one more thing we need to discuss. We know about General Marcus Hoffman." Patterson's reaction was immediate. and intense. He dropped the telephone and stared at Emma with what looked like genuine fear. "Miss Chen, you need to be very careful about the names you mention in this office. Colonel, General Hoffman doesn't exist, does he? He's a fabricated identity used to authorize operations that can't be traced through normal command channels." Patterson looked around his office as if he expected to see hidden surveillance equipment. "Miss Chen, there are some topics that are too dangerous to discuss, even in secure facilities." Emma leaned back in her chair with the confidence of someone who held all the winning cards. "Colonel, General Hoffman's signature appears on the authorization orders that sent Bravo Company to their deaths. If he's a fabricated identity, then someone real was using that identity to commit treason. We need to know who that someone is." Patterson was quiet for several minutes before responding. "Miss Chen, General Hoffman is what we call a paper general, a false identity created by certain intelligence agencies to authorize operations that require complete deniability. The real person behind that identity operates at levels of classification that I don't have access to." "But you know who it is," Emma pressed. Patterson nodded reluctantly. "I have suspicions, but no proof. And Miss Chen, the person I suspect, has the authority to make entire military installations disappear without explanation." Sarah finally understood the full scope of what they were dealing with. Bravo Company hadn't just been abandoned by a few corrupt officers. They had been targeted for elimination by someone with access to the most classified levels of American intelligence operations. "Colonel," Sarah said, "if this person is that powerful, what's to stop them from eliminating Bravo Company even after we rescue them?" Patterson's answer chilled both sisters. "Miss Chen, nothing stops them except public exposure. As long as this conspiracy remains secret, everyone involved is expendable. But once it becomes public knowledge, eliminating witnesses would only draw more attention." Emma smiled grimly. "That's exactly what I was counting on." The extraction of Bravo Company took place 18 hours later. Sarah and Emma watched from the communications center as 3 military helicopters approached the Soviet installation where the Marines had taken shelter. Lieutenant Colonel Webb's voice came through clearly as he coordinated the evacuation of his wounded men. "Control, this is Webb. We have 847 effective personnel ready for extraction. We also have recovered communications equipment containing evidence of the conspiracy against our unit." Emma grabbed the microphone. "Raven Leader, this is Control. Secure all evidence and prepare for immediate transport to safe location. Your story is going public within 24 hours. Control, understand our story goes public. What about the people responsible for this situation?" Emma looked at Sarah before responding. "Raven Leader, that's why we need your testimony. Someone has to pay for what happened to you. The investigation that followed the Bravo Company rescue exposed a conspiracy that reached far beyond Colonel Patterson or Forward Operating Base Chapman. Congressional hearings revealed that a shadow organization within military intelligence had been using fabricated general officers to authorize the elimination of American military units that had discovered evidence of other illegal operations. The mysterious General Marcus Hoffman was eventually identified as Deputy Secretary of Defense Robert Carlyle, who had been using the false identity to coordinate with foreign intelligence agencies in operations that violated numerous treaties and congressional oversight requirements. But the most shocking revelation came when Lieutenant Colonel Webb testified about what Bravo Company had discovered before their elimination. "Senators, my unit was investigating reports of American weapons being sold to enemy forces by personnel at Forward Operating Base Chapman," Webb told the Congressional Committee. "We had documented evidence that American military equipment worth millions of dollars was being deliberately provided to hostile forces in exchange for intelligence about enemy operations. The weapons sales investigation had uncovered a network of corruption involving dozens of American military installations throughout Afghanistan and Iraq. Bravo Company had been targeted for elimination because they had discovered evidence that could have exposed the entire operation." Sarah testified about her role in monitoring the communications and coordinating the rescue. She described how she had initially thought she was just helping abandoned Marines, but gradually realized she was fighting against a conspiracy that treated American lives as acceptable losses in pursuit of profit and political control. Emma's testimony focused on the journalistic investigation that had revealed the scope of the conspiracy. She explained how her academic training in research and documentation had been essential in building the evidence that forced the military to acknowledge what had happened to Bravo Company. Senators, what started as one sister trying to help some Marines in trouble became an investigation that exposed systemic corruption at the highest levels of our military command, Emma told the committee. If we hadn't acted when we did, 847 American Marines would be dead today, and their deaths would have been used to cover up crimes that had been going on for years. The congressional investigation ultimately led to the resignation of 3 Pentagon officials, the court-martial of 17 officers, and the complete reorganization of military intelligence oversight procedures. Colonel Patterson received a dishonorable discharge and served 4 years in military prison for his role in the conspiracy. Deputy Secretary of Defense Carlisle was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for treason, conspiracy, and the deaths of American service members in previous operations. But for Sarah and Emma Chen, the real victory was simpler and more personal. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb and 846 other Marines from Bravo Company returned home alive to their families. The one Marine they couldn't save, Private First Class Tommy Morrison, who had died from his wounds during the first day of the siege, was posthumously awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his role in recovering the communications equipment that provided crucial evidence of the conspiracy. Sarah left her job as a military contractor and used her experience to start a non-profit organization that advocates for military whistleblowers and investigates cases of abandoned American service members. Her organization has since helped expose 3 other cases where American military units were deliberately placed in danger to cover up illegal operations. Emma completed her journalism degree and became an investigative reporter, specializing in military and intelligence affairs. Her first book, The Frequency of Betrayal: How 2 Sisters Saved 1,000 Marines, became a bestseller and led to additional investigations that revealed similar conspiracies in other government agencies. The sisters maintain the encrypted communication system they developed during the Bravo Company crisis. They now use it to coordinate with military personnel, intelligence analysts, and investigative journalists around the world who are working to expose corruption and protect American service members from their own government. But perhaps the most important outcome of their experience was the realization that individual citizens, even those without official authority or resources, can challenge powerful institutions when they're willing to risk everything to do what's right. As Emma wrote in the conclusion of her book, Sarah and I weren't trying to be heroes. We were just 2 sisters who heard American Marines calling for help and decided we couldn't live with ourselves if we didn't answer. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not by armies or governments, but by ordinary people who refuse to accept that injustice is inevitable. The frequency that Sarah and Emma used to communicate with Bravo Company is still active. Military personnel around the world know that if they find themselves abandoned by their own command, if they discover evidence of corruption that their superiors want to suppress, or if they simply need help that can't be obtained through official channels, they can reach out to the Chen sisters. The message is simple. This is control. We read you. Help is on the way. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything.